Hi, Raven.
Hello.
How are you? Where are you now?
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in my studio.
Nice studio. So the last time we saw each other, we were in the same place, same physical space, and we finished our collaborative work in the opera Switzerland. And we're both the composers. And I just have to tell you that, well, you already know that how much not only like respect of music that I have for you, but also you're such a great collaborator. And a lot of people have been asking me, how did two composers work? So I just want to, I know what my answer are. I want to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you. Of course, the feeling's mutual. It was a lot of fun working with you, and I learned a lot from you. I don't know if I've been in proximity to such a master composer since I was a student. So I learned a lot of different things. But especially when we got to rehearsing and working through how this music that we wrote could be changed or shifted or adapted to the collaboration with the directors. But as maybe the listeners out there should know, we had a lot of other discussions over years, with the creative team and those of us, the librettists and you and I, about a lot of non-musical things. So a lot about, what issues is this opera addressing? What are the topics that often get ignored when we're dealing with history or the concerns of artists of color or the general, people of color at large. And we were very conscious of how we were putting our own work out into the world, careful that it wasn't going to be, taken as a representation of where we come from. And also being conscious of ways that our work often gets pigeonholed into, being some kind of identity that, of course, most artists aren't.
Yes.
A lot of artists are artists because they think quite different than their community, and in some communities that can be a exalted and celebrated thing, that
yes,
artists have this other kind of magic or this other kind of way of seeing the world that that is important in relaying back to the broader community and share what they learned out there or these things that they see or hear.
Exactly. I just want to say that when people ask me, they say, "Oh, where are you from? Where were you born?" Sometimes I kind of like resist of that question because it's sort of like you repeat yourself again and again. But then when I grow older, I do see the value in telling people why those backgrounds make who we are, and especially the perspectives. So again, my name is Yun. I am born and raised in Shanghai, China, and I moved to the United States not until when I was 20. So I was a formed, but that's already formed in terms of or the world value. And you are Raven Chacon. Where are you from?
I grew up on the Navajo reservation and lived there for about 10 years of my life as a child, and then the family moved to New Mexico, where my father is from. My mother's Navajo, and my father is Chicano and Hispano from New Mexico, not really with a country, as New Mexico kept changing hands from being Spain and then Mexico and then a territory and
right.
United States. And of course, before all that was various indigenous territories. So I find myself still here in this city, and that as much as where I can say that I came from, where I live today still very much informs my work and the land around where I live. So that's why I stay close to this area, because I feel like at least that part of it can be some kind of influence for my work. Not necessarily a group of people that I might, be descended from, but more thinking the land I'm descended from.
Yes, and this is actually what made me feel particularly very close to you, because as Chinese growing up too, the thing that we talk about is actually land, is actually the roots, is actually the ancestor, is also about the heritage. How are we, our relationship to our ancestors, our relationship to also our responsibility to our future generation. So, and it's funny, you know, I learned, studied composition when I was 11, and I already felt this incredible amount of responsibility that I feel like I have to carry on. I'm sure a lot of most, I would say maybe German young composers might feel the same way. You know, I should ask. I never really asked. But I remember it was a shock when I moved to the US, and in the class, they would say, oh, you know, why you do music? You know, they would say, oh, for fun. And I was like, oh my God, for fun? What does that even mean, for fun? You know, and I think that I mean, even though we have done lots of different things, and much of things are really about fun and are really about, that's why we just wanted the excitement that we wanted to engage with. But actually, our collaborations and also the criticism that we give to each other, we give to ourselves, I think a lot of times we have questioned ourselves, oh my God, is it like, what's the word that you would say? Is it too, what people, I forgot. But is it too light, right? Is it what's the perspective that people might take that theme and think?
Right. I think that was so. That might explain a bit of you know, to the listeners, one of the challenges of working on Sweetland, where a lot of this discussion we were having with Douglas Kearney, who's you know, African American poet, and Aja Kushwa Duncan, who's also a native poet and Ojibwe woman, and also Chinupa Hanska Luger, Lakota artist, and Yuval coming from this a Jewish heritage. And so a lot of our conversations ended up being about this kind of trauma bond we were talking about.
Yes.
You know, all of the, trying to take on all of the history that, you know, our family had you know, been involved in, and so we wanted to tell that story, but at the same time not just make it about, you know, being victimized, and trying to not just have, okay, there's this episode and there's the slavery episode and the, you know, native genocide episode and the Chinese episode. It wasn't like that. It was really trying to find these intersections, but at the same time complicate the narrative and talk about diaspora, forced migration, and you know, how even the complexities of Native history might even have different perspectives on what happened there.
Absolutely.
I'm one of the, you know, come from a tribe that was fortunate that, you know, we were displaced, but then we were able to return to where you know, our homelands are, and other tribes don't have that same experience. So I think what our goal was, and what our you know, responsibility was to try to let people know that this is a very complex narrative of a bunch of hundreds of narratives that we can at least try to mediate through this opera.
Yes, and also I was so grateful that you think the same as I do. I remember when I first approached by Yvon Sharon, he was telling me about this idea, which actually was very different than the idea that we came up with later. But I was very afraid that, you know, that I only get to do one perspective, and then you get to do the native perspective. But from the get-go, the two of us decided that we're just gonna take all those materials and kind of like defragment it from the ground up. And then we don't even tell people who did what. You did this, you did the European, the chorus thing come first in the first scene. And I did something else, right? But I remember, like, the critique always also still says sometimes, you know, sometimes they think that you did all this so-called like what did they say? I don't remember.
Yeah, there's an expectation that I might just be writing the the native melodies or those
with pan
parts.
flutes.
Yeah, and do maybe some kind of the funny thing is we did this in Los Angeles, which has a long history of making its own kind of indigenous version of, or its own version of indigenous music, these flutes and drums and very simple pentatonic kind of modalities. But no, we complicated that. We actually, some of the process for those listeners out there is that we looked at maybe like I remember we looked at Mongolian music at one time, which has a lot of similarities of
absolutely
some uncanny similarities of Navajo culture and tradition, and looked at that as a possible mediator of saying, okay, let's listen to that, let's see what that sounds like.
And starting from the future, right? Starting from the future of that, from those lands.
Oh yeah. Time, that was one luxury that we had, you and I, is that this opera was, though it was dealing with history, could be completely displaced from time. That was what we were doing here, was writing a creation myth of sorts, so that we could say that this happened in the future or in an alternate universe. Even though the opera was very site specific, we kept it fluid enough so that it could be interpreted in different times or different lands.
Absolutely.
And maybe that a person can still interpret that story as being relevant to a different situation.
Yeah, I actually wanted to talk a little bit, using today's time to really talk a bit about something maybe sensitive that we don't get to talk about quite often with the media, but because the two of us are here, how do you think about, because there is this talk about that diversity, right? I have my idea of what diversity should mean and should entail, but also what's the, like, who owns the culture and who gets to say what? If I get to have that fabrication, or we look at things and but can someone else can do it too? And how do we engage people to,
I think I can answer, or at least speak about some part of that you're talking about. And I think there was a part of Sweetland that was quite unique in that it's very rare that you are going to have an opera on the topic of Native American history, and also have so many people involved and the creative team that are Native artists, while at the same time it should be recognized that there's very, very few Native American or American Indian opera singers, and even chamber musicians that are working out there in the world right now. So yes. How do we have that representation? And we were trying to blur the story to a degree where it had some fluidity without actually whitewashing anything. That was the last thing we wanted to do.
The erasure, yes.
We didn't want to erase anybody's story, but we wanted to complicate it and turn it into something that can be adaptable. Mm-hmm. So in doing so, I think we found some it took a lot of discussions with the singers and people. We actually became quite close to them in discussing their own worldviews and their own stories of their families, and try to find some similarities. And it wasn't just putting a face to a character. We wanted to say that, okay, this could actually be a person who's representing a lot of different histories, at least in California, Southern California, or the United States, or the Southwest. We can at least start there. This is not an opera that was trying to solve the problems of the world. It was really trying to at least start with the Americas. And there's so many different folks who have been included in the story of this country that are usually neglected, that I didn't find a problem of let's say a Korean singer being a person who's representing somebody who's similar to Pocahontas, let's say. Even though there's no Pocahontas in our opera, there's a woman who is involved in a forced marriage, an indigenous woman who is representing both the land and an early person who met these arrivals. So I didn't see a problem in that, because there was the truth is there's simply not enough indigenous singers out there to play all these parts.
Then what it will become a problem?
What was that again?
When, like when is the threshold, right?
Yeah.
When the threshold becomes too large, that we feel being endangered or being threatened or being unfair to be treated.
So are you saying, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
I think also in today's climate too, a lot of it can go to the other spectrum, which is so careful that like only one particular person can do one particular thing and only that particular thing. So now this is also very dangerous. I think it's dangerous because not only is it pigeonhole human, but also pigeonhole that culture becoming like this dead end entity.
Right. And I think that's where there requires some care on deciding what these stories are going to be, at least in opera, or what the topic is going to be. Mm-hmm. If the topic is meant to be very documentary or even anthropological, I think you're going to put yourself into a corner of representation. Whereas what we're supposed to be making is art, and this art should have some kind of, like I keep saying, fluidity. That it should have some kind of stretch to it. Mm-hmm. It should maybe even confuse to a point. So you can't be making lazy decisions when you're composing this kind of scenario. I think having great care and finding out who all the participants are is going to be important. And that's why we're seeking diversity and saying, well, let's at least have different possibilities of singers who can audition. Let's try to bring somebody in who doesn't live here instead of just, finding a bunch of white folks who live in the area who could pull this off.
And let's not just think about the voice type. We didn't even go from voice type first.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's about the people first.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes an art form drove itself a huge, profound trap that it only can be this. Lyrical tenor can only sound like this, with no regard that people change, people shift, our story, our connection to each other within the communities also evolve with the time, with the generation, with our 2020 is so different than 2019, like just to say the slightest. So I think that's a sort of trapping in so-called classical music or contemporary music, is that we have a very set idea of what that could entail. And that could entail often disregard to people who might not be living on that land, for instance. Right? So this is also what my understanding of thinking about the Eurocentric perspective. You learn that things have to resolute, and you learn the instrumentation, you learn the orchestration, like against the older orchestration, but it's still against their tradition, their generation. So for us, how to invite all these perspectives and all this, I would say also sensibilities, like starting from the land, everyone's connection to land is different, right? So, but I wanted to because you touch upon something really interesting about the representation and the laziness of finding people and identify people who can represent. Then I wanted to ask you a little bit about because you also do curate, you also do lots in visual art and installations. In curating, what would be considered to be a lazy approach? for you?
A lazy approach, and this happened a lot in the first, let's say 10 years ago, when I was still an emerging composer as well, is, I don't know how many of these I participated in, but somebody thinks there's people who think a solution to this kind of problem of making space for others is to have, let's say, a concert of just Native American composers. And my music couldn't be farther from the next Native composer who's working out there. And there's very few of us. We all do quite different things, and we come from different corners of the country. But the region,
culture,
yeah, for some reason people think that that's a good idea for a concert, of just having a night of American Indian chamber music. And those are, I didn't appreciate being in those kinds of concerts. I love the music of other indigenous composers that are working out there in the field, but my music doesn't always fit on a concert with them, or theirs on something like, I would be presenting. It's very hard to try to put these, pegs into the holes,
right.
So that can be very lazy. I think also this might have to be put into the hands of the artist or the composer or musician. It's a case-by-case basis, but I might not put in my bio where I'm from or anything. I might put where I was born, because that might give enough of a clue, but I kind of stopped identifying as Native American or American Indian, because I feel like maybe you can hear that in the music, and if you can't, that's okay as well, but maybe it's not relevant to every situation or every piece that I'm presenting. There's times when it is, and definitely in the case of Sweetland, I was happy that that the industry had wanted to find an indigenous composer to tell this story. They very easily could have found somebody else, but they knew how important it was and how rare it was that that this might come up. So that would be a situation or a time when I would, surely broadcast my identity, but it's not always needed. And I think curators need to understand that too.
Right. So I think that then it's also just like what you said. We should also introduce the fluidity of identification, right? Like, or ideas, or who we are, or our values. Maybe I shouldn't use the word values. But it's sort of like, for instance, I love your noise music. I love your electronic, crazy loud stuff, because I do that too. But I never would do that thinking that, oh my God, I'm the Chinese, who cares, right? Like at that level, who cares? You just do the best noise. There it is. I think for me, the identifying contemporary people's needs and their living condition and their condition, I would say, is just be sensitive about this ongoing, changing, evolving human conditions that we live.
Yeah, I really like that. I like that there's that facilitators, let's say curators or programmers or other artists, should make the space for an artist to be able to transform, to change. I'm not saying some kind of Rachel Dolezal or something where you change your race or something, or blackface or whiteface or any of that kind of thing. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about being conscious of not pigeonholing somebody so that they can have that idea, that possibility to shapeshift or to change in ways that were unexpected or that might facilitate their art. And there's no easy way for artists to do that either, but that's kind of how we all live. I think that's still what artists do, is try to navigate a constantly shape-shifting world.
Yeah, and I feel like we always like looking for stimulations, right? We're looking for exchanging and for stimulation to be challenged, to have our own worldview to be challenged a little too, so that it's not just we are always the cultural guide to tell people what has happened, because what is going to happen to us is going to happen to our future generation is up to us. And and that pigeonhole of what it has been is dangerous, right? It's also, so because that just killed, as you said, I love it, killed the transformation of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I guess, you know, it gets me then thinking about something that might just contradict what I said also, is that those are for perhaps for the audience or for people who are listening to the music or looking at the art. But on the other hand, I might have a different identity as a teacher or as a mentor to other Native students, or for yourself with, you know, let's say Chinese American students who are, you know, trying to find their place in the world, or you know, immigrant students, is that I think they do need some handles to say, oh, this is a person who's come before me who understood how to navigate this. In those situations, I give more away, or I'm more open about maybe where I'm coming from or who I think I am. And so that's important too, because I can't be that same person to people who are trying to learn from
No, because we lead by examples, right? And for me, it's also showing the sensitivity that we live in a specific time, and the new generation, they have their own time to grapple with. They have their own economical loans that are very different. That's so serious, right? Like, so whatever worked for me, for you, Raven, should not work for them. But it's the spirit, it's how when we see the set of challenges, we use our references, we look at where we come from, and deal with that challenges. I think those are invaluable lessons that we can part with. Yes, go ahead.
No other words. You said exactly what I was thinking.
Oh, that's so cute. So see, also I wanna tell people that and remind the both of us that if there were no pandemic, actually right now you will be teaching at the reservation. You will be going soon, and we talked about me going there for this year. Can you tell us about what is this reservation camp teaching?
Yeah, this is a project I've been doing this would be the, let's see, 16th year I'm doing this project. It's called the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project. And what the project is myself going to different reservation schools, the Navajo Reservation, where I'm from, also the Hopi Reservation, which is also in northern Arizona. And previously also we were working with the Salt River Pima community, which is near Phoenix. And I go to a high school for a week and recruit some young composers, maybe up to 10 at each school, and give them the assignment of writing a 3-minute piece for string quartet. And so half of these schools, they have music programs. And the reason they have music programs is usually because they have a really good football team or sports team. So they need a marching.
Right.
And other schools, they don't have any arts funding. They don't have any, you know, they just have very few classes. And some of these schools are very rural. Some of the students don't have electricity in their homes or running water. So you have a full, you know, different spectrum of conditions of where these students are coming from. And so, you know, giving them the task of writing in Western notation, for me, I approach it like they're learning another language that they're going to have to relay on to a group of professional musicians who only read that language or who are most versed in that language. And so that's more the instruction. It becomes less about, you know, what kind of music they're writing, because these students, some of them have very strong traditions and are knowledgeable about their own tribal music, but kids everywhere, all over the world, might listen to hip hop or, you know, metal or any kind of music. So my hope is just to bring all of that out and have them write a piece for, you know, these changes.
For like two questions: how do you recruit them, and second, why string quartets?
Well, that was the original format of who the organization, who is, you know, funding this and who is organizing it, which is the Grand Canyon Music Festival. So it started with just different visiting quartets who would come do these concerts at the Grand Canyon. And what started happening was, you know, more outreach to the nearby communities. Some of these kids, they live an hour away from the Grand Canyon and have never been there. So it's such an amazing thing to be able to present a concert of their works there at the Canyon every Labor Day. And so that's why string quartet, but also it's, you know, it's a very kind of direct medium. It's good to, you know, it's maybe a good first task to give them just kind of, let's say, just strings without getting into transposable instruments and all, you know, everything.
Do they feel string quartets are part of the repertoire?
You mean of traditional music?
Traditions.
Not necessarily. There is actually an Apache violin, which is made from a tree trunk and a single string, but that's not necessarily.
The reason I'm asking is that, and also the reason that we were talking about having me there is that since last year I'm involved with this initiative in Tibet, in Qinghai, Tibet. That also, like you, it's sponsored by the foundation, and they are going to villages to that region, and the socio-economical class of their kids are very vastly different, but mostly poor, and definitely all of them are first generations kids go to school, so they learn both the Tibetan and the Chinese. But what happens is that what I visited is that it's quite shocking that, you know, they don't really teach the traditional Tibetan songs or the Tibetan traditional dances of Bailong Zhuowu is only to be taught as a religious form and only can be taught to boys. Girls cannot be learned. Girls cannot learn those techniques because those has been like historically shunned away. So looking at the initiative is about collecting the traditional materials and to actually actively teach back to the kids, and then they can do whatever they want, right? So, but my question for them and what I learned from them really is also the two difficulties and the two challenges that they face, which when we talk, I feel like we were talking about that too, is that yes, they have this incredible wealth of tradition, but they don't see the future with it. They don't, they feel like also they feel the incredibly beautiful mountains and lakes and the high altitude are actually what's imprisoned them, because they cannot go out. And they really wanted to go out and go to sea and have that, because they are just so curious to see. They've never even seen puppetry before, and that's what brought back, you know, they just the amount of curiosity to the world is massive. And also sort of flattened, it's as massive as next kids from Shanghai, if not more. So this has got me thinking, and when you were talking about those kids, and I thought it would be so great to have them really like, and that's still happening, you know, is to talk to each other and see, you know, what's the common challenges, shifts are. And how do you, I think the question I would like to ask you as we grapple with this together is how do, not you as individual artists, because I know that answer for myself as a composer and a musician, but I'm also trying to figure out an answer for like, what do you think about the tradition and then the future, and what does that mean, and how can we teach to the next generation?
Yeah, what you're saying, you know, I completely agree with and understand. You know, myself being one of those young people who lived out there in this very rural place and felt, you know, that there was this other world beyond living in the Navajo reservation, and maybe also having this feeling that once I did move away from there, that was the only thing that somebody might have been interested in myself, is where I come from. So I can see the hesitation of a student to say, hey, I don't want to write something in a traditional style. I have this idea for a, thrash metal string quartet or something. And so my task is just to get them the skills of being able to get whatever down, make whatever piece you want. I found that the students I have over 4 years, and I actually have a student who's been I've been mentoring for so long that he's now my assistant. I think throughout, after they get that out of their system, they go back and look at who they are and what they have to say and how it all combines into something that is very, unique and rare. And so that's the kind of thing I try to develop, instead of just trying to, squeeze out of them their traditional knowledge.
Absolutely. And don't you think that sometimes it's just also offer more viable career paths and more viable life choices? Not that they have to choose it, but they should have all those selections that they feel free to choose.
I think so. I think, having said that, anybody can have a, perhaps a lucrative career selling out, being a new age world music artist. I think there's probably Tibetan kids and Navajo kids who could go and do something very
Tibetan hip hop is so cute. So
it's something very stereotypical or new agey or world music, and sell a ton of music or gigs doing that kind of thing. And if anything, my encounters with these young people is to show them that there are, very different alternatives.
Exactly. The other alternatives, right? All this like viable, like more options. So it's not just what is commercially available, or there's just no future if you don't do that.
Yeah, and maybe, it's probably not viable to be a noise musician, but I'm at least showing them that end of the spectrum and show them how I, offset that, and how I might have made a career out of doing, art presentation, sound art, all those other kinds of things. Teaching is, they're probably wondering why I'm there, and sometimes I tell them, hey, I have to make a living still doing this kind of, noise music.
Yeah.
So
when I say viable, I actually mean that life choices that often, especially in those regions, especially if you're a woman, if you're a girl, there are only so limited paths you can do and you can go through. And oftentimes that they quit school in their teenage year because they have to move the position for their younger brothers. So for their entire life, I felt they're in waiting to get married, have kids, and just into the other role. So, and I think that this is why I feel being an artist like us, I feel incredibly powerful, because we get to choose to do the projects. We get to choose to do noise music. We get to choose to do all this kind of different projects. And also, and I also wonder, how can we really think about open up the sources of knowledge. And I think the hoarding of knowledge has been really scary in the classical music, especially.
Yeah, that I completely agree with you. This hoarding of knowledge and this holding on to this tradition that's inside of classical music and Western music. And so that's the biggest thing I can teach these students, is that, it's a language. You can learn this language. You can understand these instruments, which are beautiful instruments. They have their own tradition, but it doesn't mean you have to write in that way, And there are going to be different corners of this world that won't like what you do, but there will be very strange corners that might like what you, the odd things you make with these tools in this language. So that's all I can really teach these young people. And, you know, what's been interesting is, you know, in the 21st century is that all these young people might have, you know, apps and iPhones and things. And maybe they're not interested in writing another string quartet again, but I get students who then, you know, have questions of, oh, well, I want to work in a recording studio, or I want to move to the next city and, you know, make other kinds of music. And so that's where, you know, a lot of the lessons end up, you know, evolving into something else, or they want to become a sculptor or, you know, a filmmaker. And so, you know, I'm there to also at least try to guide some of that discussion. But yeah, it's to let them know that on one hand, we're dealing with a very old European tradition. On the other hand, that's just one way to get into some kind of door that goes somewhere else. And really, that's all I can teach them.
And how can we teach them their own traditional music or traditions?
If I had more time, I would get more into that. And like I said, when I have returning students over the years, you get into those discussions. I think, though, I can't stress enough how important it is that there are their own local teachers there that are hopefully encouraged.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't want them to forget, you know, where they come from. All I am is the oddball that comes into their community, comes back home, I should say, because I'm from there, and shows what I learned outside, you know.
Right. The outside in is like the perspective, I think, is very valuable for them, right? And I think for people like us, I always make sure that I collaborate with the local artists who know so well with their artistries within their land, within their communities, and I cannot be the spokesperson for anything. I think that I have another question, which is a presentation. I think that pandemic actually is making me thinking a lot about the technology integrated of the technology, like how music work is going to be experienced, or art world, as you know, are having a huge topic about this. Have you thought about that?
Well, I do know that I don't like to see exhibitions online. During COVID time, I realized it's not that I like looking at art, you know, sculptures or paintings or things like that. It's that I like to be in the presence of them. I like to go to the place, the museum or the gallery, and just be with them or amongst it, you know, amongst these artworks. And it's not necessarily that I'm liking to see a two-dimensional view of it to understand it. There's something else maybe I can't explain, but and the same might apply to live music, of course, that we, you know, live music is one thing and recorded music is another thing. And some pieces adapt very nicely to just a recording medium and others don't, and others I prefer only to see, you know, I mean, I love watching noise and going to concerts of noise. I don't know if I can always just sit in my studio or read a book and listen to that stuff, you know. It's quite different.
I know.
For some,
I always feel like, you know, if I see another Zoom concert, my mind is going to explode a little.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. One last question, and that's actually my burning question to you, is that how, for someone who wants to collaborate with Indigenous artists, for someone who wants to program Indigenous artists, could you provide some sort of guidance? I wouldn't say guidance, but your perspective of what would be an equitable way to do so? Would it be an honorable way to do so?
I think first, one should research that person's work, and it's not a big problem right now, but find out, you know, of course, what tribe this person is from, where they come from. Seek out folks that are, you know, identifying as Indigenous, are recognized in their communities as being Indigenous artists, and you must like their work. I mean, don't collaborate with somebody when you don't really like their work. And then just now we can, you know, Zoom each other up, it seems like, and take the discussion further. But of course, they should be equal collaborations. If you're seeking a film score or something and you need a very particular flute and drum kind of thing, yeah, sure, that's some other kind of paid gig. But if you're talking about an art collaboration, I think should be a very equitable situation, and a very, you know, self-determined situation between those involved about what it's going to be. And you might find that the person has an idea that they would like to that might need that contribution from the person who's seeking the collaboration that they don't have access to. So that can be very equitable and kind of, you know, reciprocal relationship of making something that would never exist in the world had that union not come together. Other than that, yeah, there's no excuse for not really researching somebody's work right now. Hopefully everybody has things online and things that they can find out. And
even having done research, what would be the trapping for curators to engage a group of Indigenous artists and musicians?
Like if you were programming a concert and you wanted to include a Native musician or composer?
If I want to have a theme, which I always think it's a really bad approach, or not a bad approach, but already sort of like you want the artist to fit in your role, to fit your vision. And I'm trying to find like, what is the alternative way, right?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that not just making a concert of identity. I think there's other things to talk about than somebody's identity. There could be shared experiences, there could be shared ancestral experiences, there could be, you know, worldview. I think there's a lot of overlap in worldview, cultural worldview or contemporary worldview. And I think it definitely requires some meetings with somebody, you know, time permitting, just to see, you know, what do you think of this? What do you think? And being very open-minded. If somebody might have issue with let's say a title or something, there's a lot of tropes. I mean, nobody should be making concerts that say decolonize this, or, you know, that's overused right now. So decolonization, all these things, without really seeking what that might mean to somebody. But I think there's a lot of these kinds of tropes that are happening.
What that might mean to you, decolonization?
I just feel like it's an overused kind of saying, you know, in exhibition titles, or there's been a couple concerts or conferences where it's, you know, it's talking about that, but it's there's so much more to talk about. I mean, there's so much more to go deeper into than just decolonizing the institution. And that's too much for us to get into right now on this Zoom. But I think coming up with, we're still making art at the end of the day.
I like the shared experience you mentioned, because the shared experience can also jump out of all these identities and can relate to the audience as well. So the audience can resonate with whoever artists are in question to be exhibited or concert or showcased, right? So that's how the work is going to be having that shared experience with the local audience, instead of the local audience always looking at, you know, a curiosity objects to different things.
Yeah, let's put it this way. An Indigenous artist or a minoritized artist does not want to be the textbook to a group of people about their own history. What would be interesting, or what could be appealing, is if one gets asked, well, tell us your thoughts on time, or tell us your thoughts on spatialization of sound, or tell us your thoughts on, I don't know, inaudible sounds, or tell us your thoughts on whatever, frequency, and light, and the universe. But anything but, you know, having
how to build a climax.
Exactly.
Seriously, because I remember, you know, that's the sensibility that everyone feels differently, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
why there's so much thing we talk about this times-based media and all that, but all those things, the value system, we are still looking at the value system from the Eurocentric values. That's how time works. That's how events worked. That's how events worked with another event. And that's how the story are being cleanly packaged. And we are, you know, writers still look at it that way, but it's not our part of how we experience the world and why, you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that, you know, to bring it back to Sweetland, that was what I learned a lot from these discussions that were far beyond my knowledge of being able to talk to some of the other creative team, people who are working on lighting, on projections, all artists of color, and hearing about their worldview about, you know, and their opinions on aesthetics. And I just learned so much of all this different ways that the thing can look and the way it can flow and move and how they perceive audiences and just this overall
and how they build the conflict, right? Build the conflict and smooth out. Yeah.
And humor, like humor is all, it was inside of this.
True.
Very clever and subtle ways that, you know, requires audiences to think, oh, this is some joke in there I don't understand, but there's so many layers. We'll find it out together, you know.
That's so cool. It's exactly what I was saying. Like that's how, in the end, it's about how understanding and being open-minded to how people relate to each other, because how people relate to each other are just intrinsically different and varied. Well, I think I'm done. But thank you so much for your time. This just that decolonization. I know we can like go on for days for our topic.
Yeah. I'm sorry if anybody has a you know, conference coming up that's already using that term in there, but maybe I would think about changing that because it's there's other discussions. I think it's moved on into something very more urgent than that, or more inclusive, or maybe not so reductive. Yeah.
Also reductive and more urgent. Absolutely. Thank you.